Hello and good evening, everybody. Thank you for attending our webinar on multi-hull sail trim. I think you'll find it informative, and there's always room for questions and so on. So let's wait a couple minutes and let a few more people sign in, and then we'll go forward from there. How you doing, Stan?
Yeah, good, Brad. How about yourself?
I'm good. I'm all set. This is good.
Yep. Did you get out on the water over the weekend?
I was, yes, I was on the water. It was good fun. We did a beautiful evening sail on Friday night, and then had dear old dad out for Father's Day on Father's Day. How
Oh,
about
nice.
you? Were you on the
Yeah,
water?
I got out with my in-laws on Sunday.
Oh, cool.
Yeah.
Excellent. All right. I think we might as well
Should we get going?
get things rolling here. Can you see that little screen, the little
Yeah.
in the middle? Can you?
Yeah, I don't know what that is.
Yeah.
Never seen it before.
I haven't either. That's brand new. Okay. All right. Well, let's go, ladies and gentlemen. We got a fun little chat this evening. And Stan is a guy who's joined North in the last year, and he was a BU sailing team coach. He has sailed a lot of multi-hulls, and it's a lot of fun working with him. He's got a lot of knowledge on little nuances of sail trim on multi-hulls. So I'm going to turn this over to Stan, and I'll see some of your questions come in. Maybe we can ask them on the way. If we get a little dogged down, then we'll wait till the end, and maybe we can get an email to us, and we'll be able to send you a note after that. So thanks for attending, and here you go, Stan. Take it away.
Thanks, Brad. I want to thank everybody for coming tonight. If you're in northern climates, the weather's finally turned into summer. Hopefully you've been able to get out on the water. If you live down south, hopefully you've been sailing for quite a while. Thank you all for coming, and we'll get going on our downwind or our multi-hull sail trim presentation. We're going to start with downwind sail trim, then we'll move on to upwind sail trim, covering the different major sail controls and some technique for both points of sail, and then we're going to wrap it up with some reaching, trim, and technique.
Excellent. Okay, Stan, take it away.
Next slide. So this talk is going to be focused on a bunch of different boats, but the principles should be similar for all of them. So whether it's a big boat like this, we're probably not going on a party boat anytime soon, but it's a good thing to think about. Or sailing around by yourself, trying to get across the ocean as fast as possible. Or now most of us don't go on a ride like that either, but it'd be nice to think about. Or sailing around with your wife or girlfriend on your Hobie 16. This guy's got his engine out, so he's cheating a little bit. I don't think we're gonna have any more motor sailors in the rest of the presentation though. So like I said, we're gonna start with our discussion on downwind sail trim first. Depending on your boat, you're gonna have different inventory. Some beach cats, like an A-class catamaran or a Marstrom 20, it will only have a mainsail. Some will have just a mainsail and a Gennekar. Actually, a Marstrom 20 has a Gennekar also. Marstrom 32, mainsail Gennekar only. Some others will have a jib, and maybe depending on the size of your boat, you might have a Screecher also. And we'll start first with our mainsail, talking about mainsail trim downwind and major mainsail controls. Sheet, Traveler, Rotation, Outhaul, and Cunningham. A big driver to your trim technique is your deck layout, the ease of how certain controls may be able to be adjusted. For example, some Cunninghams are readily adjustable, others are not. Same with Traveler. Some Travelers go up and down really easily, or maybe they're led to a winch, so you can really wind them in and out quickly. Others might be harder to adjust. The size of your boat will also drive what you may be using, what may be your primary sail controls. For example, this boat right here, this is a 32-foot catamaran known as the Lightspeed 32. It's I think it's about 11 feet wide, and you can see the Traveler on the rear beam there is spans most of the rear beam. It's probably about 8 feet wide, so it's got a big throw. So that's a nice, powerful control that you could drop way down if necessary, and then pull back up. But the main sheet in the Traveler should really be adjusted in unison. When you're going downwind, or on some boats, really, you don't drop the Traveler much at all, and you may only adjust the main sheet.
But Stan, it looks to me like in this picture, these guys, there aren't a lot of white caps. So what do you think is blowing here? 10, 12?
Yeah, 12 at the max. You're right. There's not a lot of white caps at all, but this is a relatively light boat, so it's able to fly a hull in 7 or 8 knots. Pretty efficient. Sorry, go ahead.
What do they got? 4 crew on there?
Yeah, there's 4 crew, and you can see they've got their Gennekar out, and they can keep their jib up going downwind. There's enough space between the Gennekar and the jib that the jib can just fly all the time. It doesn't need to get taken down.
Yeah. Well, the Traveler's right amidships, and so using your main sheet and your Traveler to basically control the power in the rig, right?
Correct. And like you said, this is pretty light air, so the Traveler is going to be all the way up, and the main sheet's actually going to be trimmed pretty tight. And we are at the leeward quarter of this boat, but you can see that's a pretty tight leach profile there. Yeah. Actually, all 3 sails are trimmed pretty tight, but that's good in light boats and marginal hull flying conditions to kind of trim the sails tight and see if you can get the hull to pop.
Would you kind of try and use a little more twist if you felt like the boat was excessively heeling, or how would you deal with that?
Yeah, you would ease main sheet then, or maybe just bear the boat away too, just depending on what angle you're sailing. You know, if you're VMG sailing downwind on a run, then, you know, as more power came to the boat, like, you know, in the form of more velocity, then you would probably ease a little bit, but then just try to bear away and, you know, take that power lower.
So the key is to bear away, burn your speed down low.
If you're trying to get downwind, if you're reaching, then you would crack sheets, you know, so it would depend on what, you know, what your actual point of sail is.
Yeah. Cool.
Mass rotation on a lot of boats. Actually, let's go back to the Lightspeed slide. The right thing to do is just to uncleat it and let it go where it wants to. Downwind, the rotation can kind of find its happy place. Outhall and Cunningham, we have them on the list here. Neither of those is really that important to control going downwind. Cunningham on almost every boat should be taken off, no matter how windy it is. The Cunninghams on catamarans are pretty powerful control, and they can bend the mast a lot. And if you bear away, especially when it's windy with a lot of Cunningham tension on, you could risk breaking the mast. You can, if you have an outhaul that's ready adjustable, you can use your outhaul when you're on a downwind setting, but it really kind of depends on what you're doing. If you're going to be sailing for a long time, if you're doing a distance race going downwind, then maybe you would ease the outhaul a little bit. If you're going around the buoys, it's almost not worth it to ease it and then be bothered with pulling it back on at the leeward mark, because if you forget, it's almost impossible on most modern catamarans to get the outhaul back on going upwind. So for what you get for a little bit loose foot in terms of boat speed, you can really mess up in terms of boat handling. Yeah, let's go to the next slide now, and we'll talk more about the Traveler again. This is a trimaran, and you can see with a much narrower center hull. So the Traveler is shorter, which makes it a less powerful control than the last boat that we were looking at. So you can see these guys have dropped their Traveler all the way down, and but then they've still had to ease their main sheet out to get the boom in the proper spot. Now, this is a pretty extreme photo too, though. This is really light air. You can see they've got their outhaul way off, and so you really probably wouldn't be sailing with that loose amount of main sheet tension or outhaul tension if there was any type of wind, but it looks like these guys are kind of drifting around.
She's also looking up at the drone taking the pictures.
Yeah, that's true. And I hope they have an autopilot. Oh, no, somebody is driving. He's got the tiller extension all the way out there.
He's over there. There he is. Yeah, not a lot of wind there. Yeah.
Yeah.
So you think that, by all accounts, the outhauls let loose too loose on this.
That's really loose there. I mean, even for how light the air is there, maybe we'd want to pull it on a little bit because, yeah, like where you got your light there, it's like there's like over a foot of draft there. That's probably too much.
Yeah.
So this is a simple drawing, and we're sorry it's not a multi-hull, but this is a good drawing that illustrates why mast rotation is a friendly control for your sailboat. You can see a traditional mast that's not rotated. There's a lot of turbulence around the leeward side of the mast and the leeward side of the leading edge of the sail. And with the rotated rig, you can see how that solves both problems. The flow over the mast is better, and the flow over the leeward leading edge of the sail is better. And for any of you that do handicap racing, you're well aware that that's the reason why you have to measure the chord length of your mast and your mast height and submit that for your rating certificate, because that gets included in the calculation for your mainsail area. And this is one of several reasons why multi-hulls tend to be more efficient than monohulls. This in case doesn't have anything to do with hull shape or weight of boats, but just in terms of aerodynamics for the sail plan. The rotating mast is a much more efficient sail setup. And here's a great drone picture of a Marstrom 32 from the masthead. Again, this rotation has just been uncleated and released altogether. You can see that this mast has rotated pretty far. We can see that from looking at how the leading edge is oriented to the main beam, and also how the angle of the spreaders. It's pretty windy in this photo. You can see that by the turbulence coming off of the rudders, and also by where the crew are positioned. They're seated well aft and outboard. So, the windier it gets, the mast is going to tend to rotate further forward. But again, like, it's often the case that just releasing the rotation downwind and letting the rotator kind of go to where it's going to naturally rest is going to be the right thing to do. That's not always necessarily the case, but it's a good, it's generally a good starting point. Our next slide is going to be of an inner 20, where you can see the same thing. This is a good, this photo is great because it's looking right at the leading edge of the mast, and you can see with the rotation released, we can barely see the leeward edge of the sail off of the, which is matched to the leeward leading edge of the mast, and that's exactly what you want. And again, this rotation has just been released. There's nothing getting pulled on, and it's just kind of sitting in its own happy place.
I just noticed this is you guys, Stan.
Yeah, that's why I know what we did the rotation.
Very fun. Very fun. Cool. So rotation is really important. Does that help stabilize the boat, or is it just about performance and going faster?
It's just about performance going faster. It is an important control to be mindful of, but it's also really easy to overthink it. That's why you don't need to have a million rotation settings on your boat. There's generally one good ballpark setting for going upwind, and again, downwind, a lot of times it should just be released and shouldn't, doesn't really need to be minded too much.
Yeah, so it looks like in this picture, it looks like you might be 50.
Sorry, Brad.
15 or 18 knots of breeze in this picture, and
yes,
letting the restrainer on the rotator, just kind of releasing it. The mast finds its own happy spot.
Yeah, that's correct.
It works pretty well. It works pretty well.
Yeah. I think our next. Sorry, Brad, go ahead.
Yeah, you disappeared for a bit, so I was just going to move ahead to the Jib and Screecher Controls, but now I'm glad you're back. So here you go.
So Jib and Screecher Controls are, although they're much different sails, they're pretty similar. You're going to have a sheet. You may or may not have a lead. You may or may not have a barber hauler. You're definitely going to have a halyard, maybe a tack on your jib. And you may have a clue board where you can adjust where the lead is going to go. And that's very common, especially on boats with self-tacking jibs, because you're not going to be able to adjust your lead then. So where you attach your sheeting point to your clue is going to be what drives what, that's basically your jib lead setting. You can play around, especially with your Screecher, depending on where it sheets to in your boat, with what I call a short sheet to change your lead, especially if you're sailing a long leg or if you're doing a distance race. Short sheet is nothing other than a snatch block that's going to be the right size to be able to handle the load in the sheet. That will go on the sheet, and then you can take it to a hard point on the boat and either pull the lead inboard or outboard. More commonly, it'd be pulling it outboard. And that just gives you a little bit more flexibility with your lead. If you're sailing a long distance, it's not something that you would use if you're going around the buoys, because it usually has to just get manually put onto the sheet and then tied somewhere. But it does give you some flexibility if your deck layout's a little bit limited when you're doing distance racing. As far as like if you don't have a lead, how you're going to set up your sheeting point for your clue board, we're talking about downwind sailing right now. I actually think it's usually better to set your sheeting point up for the more efficient sail shape going upwind. And if it's out of whack going downwind, then that's just a compromise that you have to make. It's actually less important, especially if you have a Gennekar or a Screecher, that you've got the sheeting point right downwind. It's going to be more important for you to have a correct upwind.
But on your jib with a clue board, don't you have to pick the location on the clue board before you start the race? Otherwise, you'd never get it attacked. I mean,
you're not changing it. So that's what I mean. So
pick it for the weather for the day.
Pick it for the weather for the day, or for the race, or whatever it's going to be. You can't. You're not going to be able to adjust everything.
Yeah.
I think we're on to Gennekar Controls. Next slide. Same controls as a Screecher, really. A sheet. Maybe you have one or two lead positions. You're probably not going to have a barber hauler, but you can use a barber hauler for your short sheet. And you may be able to adjust your tackle, your halyard. It's usually the case that you just have the correct setting, give or take a couple inches if it's light air for your halyard, and your tack's almost always pulled all the way down. So really your setup for your Gennekar is relatively simple. There's only a couple of big variables that you're going to change at the beginning of the day, and that's going to be it. The rest is you just got to be focused on having good trim technique.
But Stan, are you setting your lead based on the way the sail is luffing or not luffing, looking at the telltales?
Honestly, in the case of this boat, this is an oversized Gennekar for this boat. And so the lead just went all the way to the back of the boat.
Yeah. But
yes.
But on standard boats, you're using the telltales along the luff of the sail to help figure out where to put your lead.
Yeah, no different than you'd be setting your lead up on any other sailboat. 1 hull, 2 hulls, 3 hulls. You're going to be using the same principles.
Yeah. Okay. All right. All righty.
Now on to technique. Brad was just talking about telltales. Use the telltales. They can be very helpful, especially on your Gennekar. The right place to put them is going to be, depending on how big your sail is, 12 feet, 12 inches, maybe a little bit more aft of the leading edge of the sail. 3 sets is probably enough at 25%, 50%, and 75% of the luff length. Telltales are helpful on your mainsail downwind, but to be honest, like you can be over trimming your mainsail before your leech telltales are going to stall out. If your leech telltales are stalling out when you're going downwind, then you've really pulled it in too hard. So you really got to kind of go with trial and error for how to adjust your main sheet going downwind, and sail the boat and talk to people that sail boats similar to yours to see what works. But what I mean by trial and error, if you're going downwind in a given breeze strength and you think you have the mainsail trimmed in right, you know, when you're just pull it in more and see if it powers the boat up. Does the boat heel over? Does the boat want to go forward? And if it does, then it was generally the right thing to do. And you got to just play around with trimming and easing the sail and looking at your relative boat speed and then looking up at what the sail looks like. Or getting good reference points for what fast settings are. Like a good reference point is the distance, looking at the distance of the blocks from your boom to the traveler car. That's like a good safe mark for me. I don't put marks on anything, but like coming out of a jibe or something like that, I usually look back and like, okay, that's generally where we trim it. Just looking at the blocks, and then look up at the sail and are you happy with the shape? That's easier said than done, but I mean, it's really learning downwind mainsail trim technique is very much trial and error and talking to other people that know how to sail the boats.
I'm a little curious, Stan. To my eye, in this picture right here, it almost looks like the upper, if that's a telltale, is streaming up there.
This sail may be over trimmed in this photo.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, we're on the leeward quarter of it, so it's hard to say for sure, but it does look like there's too much leech return.
Yeah.
And you can see this is a light air day. There's not a lot of ripples on the water, and we've got one crew member seated all the way to leeward, and the helmsman is seated almost in the middle of the boat, or as close to the middle as you can get. So you can see that these guys are really trying to work hard to pop their hull. And one way to do that, if it's, you know, if there's enough power in the sails, is to trim the sail in tight. So this may be borderline over trim, but it may be okay, because you can see they're flying a hull and not very much wind. So they might be doing the right thing, maybe not.
But they're not in first.
They're not in first. That's true.
and I'm looking at this guy here.
Yeah.
It looks like that crew is actually standing up on that.
Yeah, he might be. And they probably do have a looser mainsail trim.
Yeah.
So now back to sail trim adjustments. Unless it's extremely light air, the sail adjustments are generally small, but they're still important. You know, the range of trim on a Gennekar is not going to be a lot. You know, you're not sheeting it in and out 2 feet. It's a couple inches here or there, maybe a foot in and out at a time. You get a big velocity change. Yes, you're going to have to make bigger trim changes, but generally it's like less can be more, I would say.
Yeah.
And lastly, make sure you're asking questions. Ask questions of your competitors. Ask questions of your crew members about what works right and what was wrong. And ask your sailmaker too. You know, we're here to help you. We want to be a resource.
Well, I used to, you know, growing up sailing, there weren't a lot of catamarans around, but I used to follow and watch the guys who were known to win the races. And I set my little boats up the way they did. And pretty soon I was up in the lead of the pack too. So just following them around and learning how they've got their sails trimmed and why they seem to do better than you is a huge asset. And, you know, sometimes they can dumb it down and kind of fake you out. But generally, I know most people are more than happy to help kind of advise you along.
If you go up to somebody and you ask them why they sail their boat fast, they're probably going to be happy to talk about that, right?
Oh yeah, absolutely. So, any other tips on technique, steering or angle of heel?
Well, so you can see again, this is a tornado sailing in really light air, and so they've got their crew weight way to leeward to try and induce hull flying. They can do that because tornadoes have pretty buoyant hulls. So they're going to be able to pop. Not everybody can do that, but athwart ship's weight movement in general in multi-hulls is a really important thing to manage. Weight to leeward in light air, and making sure that you get weight to windward and get your righting moment when it's windy and you're really ramped up also. Fore and aft weight placement is also important. You know, you're generally moving back. The windier it gets and you're moving forward, the lighter it is. Now that does depend on, you know, the way that one's boat sits in the water. They're not all going to be exactly the same, but Minding your weight placement, because all our boats are relatively light. So even if you're sailing on, a 31-foot trimaran, that crew of 4 or 5 that's on it is still a pretty large portion of relative to the weight of the boat, and so their weight placement matters a lot.
Yeah. Oh yeah, absolutely. Even on the bigger monohulls, it's amazing how where you put weight is affects the performance of the boat. It's
Yeah,
fun.
absolutely.
How about rig setup, Stan? Do you adjust the tension on the shrouds for given wind velocities or anything like that? You're going to get into that?
It's really easy to overthink that, and not really. The shrouds are generally set up just to set the rake of the boat up. Different boats are going to want different shroud tensions. But most boats carry so much main sheet tension going upwind that's the driver for head stay sag. It's not shroud tension. So it's generally not shroud tension. It's not something that you can forget altogether, but it's not really a super important control. It doesn't affect mast bend. That's going to be diamond tension. So it's, that is something that in general makes the tuning of most catamarans and trimarans a little bit simpler than it is for monohulls.
Yeah. Cool.
This is a picture of a Marsham 32 sailing downwind. You can see it's not very windy, but they're still carrying a lot of sheet tension, a lot of leech tension, sorry. This boat has a high aspect mainsail, square top mainsail, really hard to stall it, so it can be trimmed pretty tight downwind.
Yeah, and this picture is pretty cool because we are slightly to windward of the center line of the boat, but you can barely see any of the leeward side of the leech of the main. I mean, there is a little bit of twist there, especially at the top batten.
Yeah, it's not. So the leech isn't closed out, but it's
right.
Sails trimmed tight.
Right.
Yeah.
And at this point, you're watching the telltales and making sure they're all flying.
Yep. Yeah. And just trying to make sure that the flow is over the foils is what it should be too. The trim upwind and downwind is always a dialogue between the helmsman and the trimmers. Depending on if the helmsman's not trimming their own mainsail, which in this boat they're certainly not. Downwind at a beach cat they would be, but bigger than that, you're going to have a dedicated main sheet trimmer and a dedicated Gennekar trimmer.
Yeah, and you can see how this boat's got a massive traveler on it. Runs beam to beam across the boat, and that boom is right dead amidships, isn't it?
Now we're on to upwind sail trim. Again, we apologize for another monohull photo drawing, but this is a good simple drawing that just shows us the difference between a closed leech and a more twisted leech. I actually feel like sailing upwind, it's really common to under-trim mainsails in multihull, in catamarans and trimarans sailing upwind. It's pretty hard once there's a decent amount of wind, meaning 9 knots, 10 knots or more, to over-trim the sails. I'm not saying it's impossible, but I think that for a lot of us, we err on not trimming the sail tight enough rather than over-trimming it.
Now, what do you find with the gaff battens and the square-headed mains? If you put more tension on the leech, I would think that would make the top of the sail deeper.
It can, but not necessarily.
It's not a bad thing.
No, just trim the trim to the leech, not what the depth of the top of the sail is looking like. It's generally your main sheet's a powerful control, and it's going to open up the tighter the leech, the more power you're going to get, and that's really what you should be focused on.
And you did mention something a little bit ago that the main sheet tension directly affects the forestay tension.
Yes. Yes.
Yeah.
So for upwind sails, we've got mainsail, jib, and a lot of boats may have a screecher also. That screecher could get used downwind sometimes for upwind and light air. The screechers can be, for a lot of boats that have them, can be a really versatile sail. Let's move on to mainsail controls. Same list as it was for downwind, except we included reef and battens here. Batten tension, you may have different desired tensions for your battens depending on how windy it is. You know, generally making them tighter the windier it gets. How can you tell if your battens are too loose? There'll be little vertical wrinkles at the batten pockets if your battens aren't tight enough. And if they're too tight, then you're going to have batten pocket, then you're going to have wrinkles going the way that Brad's pointing right now, horizontal wrinkles in the batten pocket. Your batten tension is, again, it is another set it and forget it control. You're going to set it up in the morning and go out for the day, and that's what you're going to have. I don't think that it's really that sensible. Say you're doing a 3-race day where it gets windy in the middle of the day. Oh, well, we had our battens tied in for light air. We got to make them tighter now. I don't necessarily think that. I mean, if you have a lot of time, you can take your mainsail down, tighten up all your battens, and pull it back up. But you can get into a lot of trouble on the water, go into starting sequence. You're trying to pull your mainsail up, then you can't get your halyard locked again. So I think you just got to, you know, take your best guess at the beginning of the day, set your mainsail batten tension up, and go out and go for it. Reef, especially on a lot of our newer boats, you know, more modern trimarans and catamarans, they're set up with really tall masts, and we're all sailing around with these big square top mains now. It's a lot of sail area. So we're starting to see ourselves getting into reefing earlier and earlier. You know, like some boats it may be the right thing to reef in 15 or 16 knots. And the reef sail there when you're maybe faster than the sail that's all the way up. Even if you have your mainsail fully hoisted and there's other ways for you to depower your boat, you know, with your sheet, Cunningham, whatever it is, if you just have this area out there that you're doing nothing but trying to depower with, it's faster just to get rid of it by reefing the sail. And if you do sail a boat where you're reefing early, I think it's very good. It's very important to have a good reefing system where you can shake your reef in and out pretty quickly. You know, have all your lines right and have your system down, and it's actually a move that you're going to practice. Where it's like, okay, well, it did just get windier. I think it's windy enough that we should reef right now. We're about to go into starting sequence, but I think we can reef right now. You know, drop the sail, get it reefed, and then get everything back up and going again. Or the other way, if you know the wind's dying at the end of the day and you think you need to shake it out. But your reef is something that you want to be able to do pretty quickly if you can.
Can you think of an easy system, or are you using an in-boom, you know, slab reef system, or the KVR reef hooks or anything like that?
I mean, yeah, you know, bigger boats will have an in-boom thing. Some boats may have a lazy jack system, or some, you know, you're rolling it up and you're just tying up the row. And, you know, like a bunch of, you know, the sails that we're making ourselves now have zippers on them. So you can roll it up and zip it. And then you've got a tack and a Cunningham. So, you know, that is a good question, Brad, but the reef system is something that is going to be pretty custom to the boat. And now we're talking about it when we're looking at a Tornado, which is not going to reef.
Well, but you're talking about the 32 footers and stuff.
Yeah. Boats that are 25 feet and above. And I actually have seen, I was talking to somebody the other day who's going to do the Warrell 1000 next year, and they're going to put a reef in their F-18 mainsail for that, which is pretty sensible for that race, because that can they don't cancel that one. So you got to be able to shorten up the sail if it gets really windy.
So you got outhaul written here. You want to say what you do with your outhaul?
Yeah, on some boats, not a lot at all. I thought it was important to include on the list because it is a control, but there are a lot of boats where it's, it's very much a static control and should just be pulled on and the foot should be pulled tight. If it's light air, you might have your foot a little bit looser, but it's not generally a control that is that big a priority. If you're sailing a bigger boat that has a readily adjustable one, then yeah, if the breeze gets a little bit lighter, during when you're on a leg, you may ease it a little bit, but it's not a control that you're adjusting a lot. Your major upwind controls are going to be your sheet, your traveler, and your Cunningham. And again, depending on the boat, the traveler may get adjusted a lot going upwind or maybe not. On a boat like this, on a Tornado or most beach cats, it's going to be pulled to center line, and that's going to be it. On bigger boats with easier adjustable travelers, that may be your primary power control going upwind. Sorry, just dropping your traveler to bleed power or reduce your angle of attack. Main sheet and Cunningham, if possible, should usually be adjusted in unison. For example, like in this photo here, it looks like it's 16 or 18 knots. As velocity comes on, the Cunningham will get, the boat starts to get overpowered. The Cunningham will get trimmed in. Maybe the main sheet will get burped, but then the main sheet will start to get trimmed in again. And the reason for that is that as the Cunningham gets pulled on, it's going to open up the leech, so the main sheet needs to get trimmed tighter again to close off the leech.
So what you're saying is when you haul on the Cunningham, it twists the upper leech.
Correct.
Opens it up. Yep.
This is a constant dialogue between the skipper and the crew about what they're doing, how much power they think they have in the sails. So that's very much where the trimmers have to be in sync about what they're each doing. And some boats don't have a Cunningham that is readily adjustable, so it's a little bit more of a static control. Then you're going to be doing more of your, depowering just by easing the sheet. But if you have a Cunningham that is easily adjustable, then it's very powerful control.
Huh. Powerful. You think it makes a difference of a quarter of a knot, maybe?
Oh yeah, or more,
really?
For sure.
Cool.
Yeah.
Wow.
Now on to mass rotation going upwind. This shot here is at the leeward quarter of the boat. You can see that we can't quite see the mast. We can see the leeward edge of the sail, but not the mast itself. We're looking, and you can see the rotation arm is pointing at the shroud, which is a general good upwind setting for this boat. And most will have a good general upwind setting that may need to get adjusted fore or aft from that. If you're sailing a one design boat, the best thing to do is talk to your competitors and figure out what the ballpark range is for the fleet. If you're not sailing a one design boat and you don't have a lot of comparable boats around you in your area, the best rule to set up your upwind rotation is to set it up similar to what that drawing was at the beginning of the slideshow, where the leeward edge of the mast is reaching the leeward edge of the left of the sail, kind of a seamless transition there. A row of telltales from the mast to the leech, about 25% up of the foot of the sail, can be a good guideline for that also, setting the rotation up so that the forward rows of those telltales are flowing straight back. And again, really, just talking to your competitors too.
Yeah.
Okay, I think we're on to, okay, this is just another picture of upwind controls. This is an upwind trim. This is another Marstrom. This mainsail probably is over trim for how light the air is. You can see again though, they're trying to pop a hull right here, but they may be overdoing it in this picture.
What else would you do in this case? If you were on that boat, would you tell your crew to go sit to leeward?
Yeah, the guy probably shouldn't be on the rack right there because the hull's not out of the water yet. If you're on a boat that flies a hull and it's not flying a hull yet, the general rule is you don't want to be like super far outboard.
Yeah.
Jib controls. again, sheet, lead, Cunningham, your halyard, clewboard, barber hauler. You can see this boat here is probably, it looks like they're kind of close reaching. They've got their lead on all the way aft here. This is a good illustration of what I was talking about with the short sheet. If they were going to crack off more and maybe needed to ease their jib more, the best thing to do would get a sheet tied, get your snatch block on there, and then you could pull that lead outboard and you can pull the whole foot of the sail outboard also. Now that said, this boat has a screecher, so they might just unroll that when they crack off more. But if you didn't have that, that's kind of a good example of what you'd be doing with your barber hauler to move your lead inboard or outboard. Let's go into Screecher Controls now. Again, similar, sheet lead, halyard tack, barber hauler. It's hard to see in this picture, but this boat actually does have a barber hauler pulling and it's pulling the clew slightly out right now. This is a big screecher on this boat. This is a Decision 35. These boats do a lot of sailing in inland lakes in Switzerland, and they sail in a lot of no wind. So they've got big inventories where they just put up gigantic sails to be able to sail in no wind, which you can see this boat, based on the wake coming off the rudders there, is actually going pretty fast for what looks like to be a pretty glassy day, right, Brad?
Yeah, but this is a massive mainsail on this boat. I mean,
it's a big mainsail too.
Yeah, I'm just looking at the girths pushed out this high up, and it's a massive mainsail, a little 35 footer.
I mean, they've got one reef in that sail, but they probably wouldn't use that sail when it was windy. They probably have a smaller sail, because you're right, like the top of that sail is gigantic.
Yeah, pretty cool. I bet that boat's a lot of fun.
Yeah, they are. Yeah. Trim technique.
Sorry.
Pull on the lines. Main sheet tension, Cunningham tension, they're really your friend. You can really surprise yourself with how much tension you can pull on your main sheet once you have a lot of pressure in the sails. Again, Cunningham and main sheet should be adjusted in unison. And your deck layout drives technique. So Brad's got his pointer around the Cunningham now. You can see that's going through like a fiddle block and going out to a spot on the edge of the deck. So that means a crew member can adjust it while they're going to be hiking out. Same with the mast rotation. That's going from the rotator arm to a block and then out to a spot on the deck. Again, it's not a control that is adjusted as often as the Cunningham, but it's good to be able to have it where if you want to adjust it a little bit, you can without moving too far. If you're sailing a boat where these controls are not readily adjustable, but you can make them that way, I think that's a good upgrade to do for your boat. And a lot of times you can do it without spending that much money. You do got to be careful if you're going to be anchoring blocks in your deck or something like that to make sure that you're putting them in the right spot. But I think it's a good idea if you can. Or just find ways to lead the lines out to the edges of the boat with take-ups, which is what most beach cats do. You got to make sure you lead stuff right so it's not getting too messy, but that's a good idea also. Now on the reach technique, these guys, I think this is a Hobie Tiger right here. They do look a little awkward on the trapeze, but I think it's pretty windy and wavy here. So I think these guys are doing a pretty good job of managing. One critique about their weight placement, though, is that they should be closer together. And in this case, probably the crew should be further aft. Depending on your angle when you're reaching, we've got this thing we call the death angle, which is when you're reaching 90 degrees to the wind. You're usually not reaching exactly 90 degrees to the wind. You're usually a little bit above, some portion above or below that. I think it's important when you're reaching to know which way your escape is going to be. And if you're reaching more open than 90 degrees to the wind, more open than a beam reach, then your escape should be to bear away if the boat starts to get overpowered. If you're on a more acute angle, meaning more of a close reach than 90 degrees to the wind, then the manner in which you're going to bleed power if you get overpowered is to head the boat up. as the helmsman, it's really important to explain, to tell the crew which way you're going to head if you start to get overpowered. And some element of steering needs to be done when you're reaching in any breeze of over, where you're overpowered. So depending on what kind of boat you're sailing, that's going to be 12 knots, 14 knots, maybe a little bit more. But when you're on a really powered up reach, you can't expect just to depower the boat with sail trim. The mainsail and the spinnaker are exposed to the wind. So really, like, easing the mainsail just doesn't really do that much to depower the boat. It does a little bit, but your steering angle is going to drive a lot of how you're managing power when you're reaching.
This Gennekar looks like it's trimmed too far forward, or maybe it's just a weird angle or something.
I think it's pretty far out.
Yeah.
And may even be luffing a little bit,
Okay.
the way it's set up.
Yeah.
So make sure you communicate to your crew members, and also be conservative. Especially when you're in a bigger boat, you don't want to flip, but none of us want to flip. All right, Brad, I think that wraps it up for us.
Pretty much. Thanks, Stan. I every time I listen to you talk, I learn a little bit more, and of course, having you in the loft gives me the opportunity to ask questions. So we're around, everybody. Hope you don't flip your cat. If you got any questions, Stan is the guy. If he's not available, fire me a note. I will either get the answer or get a hold of Stan. And it was great fun. And I hope we all have a good summer. Get out on our boats and whack around and try new techniques and new trims and trimming techniques, and get out on the water. That's more important than anything. Anything else,
Yes.
Stan?
Thank you, Brad. I appreciate your help. Thanks for everything. And thank you for watching, and please contact us with questions.
All right. Well, that's it from here, Multihull sail trim and technique. So thanks you all for attending, and we will be in touch. Have a good evening.
Thank you, guys.